Hi there, everybody. I am here to assist you today, and I am aware that you watched this film to go to sleep. Prior to that, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. In addition, what time are you watching and where are you from? Now settle in and unwind. Like a cemetery of aspirations, the deserted corporate park loomed before us. Buildings that had been partially destroyed protruded from the ground like splintered teeth. I had used this shortcut through the development innumerable times previously with my shift partner. Our return trip to the distribution location was shortened by 15 minutes. Tonight, though, was different. Unusually for October, the air was calm and heavy. Phoenix, even at this hour, and the freshly paved roads were shiny with moisture, even though there had been no rain. I think we had been walking for 10 minutes or so when I first saw the white pickup. Headlights swept across vacant lots where office buildings had been reduced to rubble and rebar as it moved along the perimeter road. The deep growl that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once reverberated off the remaining buildings as the engine rumbled. My partner also observed it. I saw him shifting his hold on his work bag while looking over his shoulder. 5 minutes later, the truck passed again. I could see two figures in the cab this time, but their faces were blurred by the tinted windows. As they rolled by, the passenger silhouette changed, its head twisting to follow us. That primal sense that I was being watched made my skin prickle. The same sensation I would have when passing coyotes in sunrise in the desert. Something had changed by the third pass. There was no one in the passenger seat. 30 feet away, the pickup's engine rumbled and ticked in the stillness. There was no door open. It would have reached me. Behind the wheel, the driver did not move. A shadowy figure that could have been staring at us or at nothing. I took my phone out. No signal. It's not out of the ordinary, but the timing left me speechless. White lights burned in reverse. The truck started to slowly and deliberately back up toward us. It was the deliberate approach of something with a goal, not the stuttering, unsure motion of someone attempting to turn around. My partner took hold of my arm. His fingers were burrowing in so painfully. I saw it at that moment. Like a mouth in the asphalt, the storm drain wrenched open. We both walked in that direction without thinking or talking about it. Something other than water slickened the metal rungs. As we went down, I noticed the odor. Something organic and industrial solvent were combined incorrectly. A dark liquid trickled along the bottom of the concrete artery tunnel, which was perhaps 6 feet in diameter. There were intermittent emergency lighting fixtures scattered throughout the ceiling, but none of them were working. Using the spotlights on our phones, we created frenzied shadows that writhed and danced with every step. The truck's engine roared louder above us, then followed the noise that chilled my blood. Overhead, tires rolled gently, keeping pace with us. They were aware of our whereabouts. Like predators pursuing wounded prey, they were pursuing us along the storm drains. About 50 yards away, the boot prints were visible in the beams of our flashlights. New imprints in the thin sediment layer. The tread pattern is clear and sharp. We didn't own them. Incorrect size, incorrect pattern. Even worse, some of them faced back toward us as though someone had stepped backwards, keeping an eye on the tunnel from behind them as they led us deeper into the system of tunnels. My partner began to breathe more rapidly, and the hard gasps reverberated throughout the cramped room. I wanted to urge him to shut up, but I was breathing as raggedly as he was. My head began to swim, and my eyes began to moisten as the solvent scent intensified. In the flashlight beams, the walls appeared to pulse, growing and shrinking as if we were within a living entity. There was a crossroad up ahead. There are 3 tunnels that diverge in various directions. The tire sounds above were going right, while the boot prints ran down the leftmost corridor. We moved straight forward, splashing through the trickle that had turned into a stream, faster now. I had to repeatedly catch myself against the curved walls after my work boots slipped on the slippery pavement, my hands coming away covered in a substance that smelled like copper yet felt like oil. The tunnel started slanting upward. Above, another grate appeared, this one displaying a purple sky in the shape of a rectangle. Desperate to get away from the obtrusive darkness and the constant roar of the engine that seemed to follow us wherever we went, we ascended. I ignored the grade, got back up, and reached back to assist my buddy. 2 blocks after entering, we came out. At the crossroads ahead, the white pickup was waiting with its headlights black and its engine off. I drew my companion behind me. Concrete barrier, a piece of the foundation of a building that has been demolished. With our hearts pounding so loudly that I was positive they could hear us, we flattened low against the dirt earth. There was utter silence in the desert. Nothing except the tick of the cooling engine and our breathing. No insects, no distant traffic. Then, just inches from where we lay, I heard it breathe, slow, purposeful respiration that didn't match my partner's or my own rhythm on the other side of the barrier. Like someone enjoying oxygen after spending too much time beneath, the breath came in long, steady draws. That stench returned, along with copper, solvent, and something else. Something that screamed warnings in my back brain. The words were spoken so near that I felt them more than heard them. Return. The voice was incorrect. Maybe too human, but not quite. As if someone had listened to recordings played backwards to learn how to talk. It emerged from the shadows of a drainage canal that ran parallel to the barrier. A throat of darkness that went on eternity. Return. In the dark, my partner's hand grabbed mine and squeezed so tightly that I was afraid the bones may shatter. Neither of us made a move. We didn't both breathe. The object on the opposite side of the barrier moved, the gravel crunching under an apparent excessively heavy weight that was dispersed incorrectly, like a person going on their hands and feet. You choose the incorrect tunnel. Return. With its headlights flashing, the white pickup's engine roared to life. I noticed shadows in that quick illumination that were moving independently of their origins and didn't match anything that was casting them. Reaching toward us with appendages that weren't quite arms and weren't quite anything recognizable. They moved across the ground like liquid. We took off running. The noises of the engines became louder behind us. Many trucks, not just one. Their headlights form a chasing constellation. The blackness stretched and blended, creating dark passageways that harmed us in the direction of the drainage canal. My partner lost his balance and fell heavily. As I lifted him up, his face was pallid, and his eyes were fixed on something behind me, causing his mouth to move silently. I didn't turn around. We tore clothing and skin as we went over the chain-link fence at the boundary of the complex. The lights of the distribution facility shone brightly ahead, offering security, normalcy, and sanity. When a security guy saw our faces, he looked up from his magazine with mild anxiety that turned to alarm. We ran across the deserted lot and rushed through the staff entrance. What occurred, the guard inquired. I was unable to respond. My boyfriend repeatedly shook his head as if he were attempting to clear his head of something. We left early, avoided talking in the locker area, and took different cars home. For the next 3 days, I called in sick. Upon my eventual return, my partner had already given up. No warning, no justification. The security officer said he had been inquiring about the previous corporate park, including who owned it and who had been employed there before to the demolition. My partner appeared odd, disturbed, and kept stroking his neck as if something were crawling on it, according to the guard. I never have to view that location, but I now take a different route that takes 15 minutes longer, with the exception of occasional glimpses of a white pickup following in the rearview mirror. It's never there when I look direct. There are just shadows that don't quite fit the objects that throw them, and my clothing always smell like industrial solvent, no matter how many times I wash them. I discovered boot prints in my flat last week, new ones that lead to my bedroom from the front door. The tunnel's characteristic tread pattern, as if someone had been standing there observing, they face the bed. According to the property management, I am the only one with a key. Nothing is visible in the security tape other than shadows moving in unexpected ways. At night, I've started to leave the lights on, each and every one. However, I hear it once again in the intervals between waking and sleeping. That murmur that comes from nowhere and everywhere, that patient breathing. Return. I occasionally question whether we ever truly emerged from those tunnels. If perhaps we're still in the dark, and everything that has happened since have been our thoughts attempting to make sense of an incomprehensible situation. The scent of the solvent gets stronger every day. Mirror reflections don't always accurately reflect my motions. Just a sliver of a second passes, as if it's debating whether or not to follow along. Yesterday, my ex-partner gave me a call. At least his number was displayed on the caller ID. Though it wasn't, the voice was his. Words that were put together from disparate syllables in reverse order. "Now I understand," he said. Said that the tunnels extended farther than we were aware and were connected to locations that weren't quite here or anywhere. Claimed that the white truck was only the first step, that they had been waiting for someone to enter the wrong doors and travel the wrong route in that deserted complex. "They're patient," he said. "Their patience has never wavered." He uttered the two words that have plagued every quiet moment since before the line died. Return. I'm aware that I should leave Phoenix. Go somewhere else and start afresh. But I have a feeling it wouldn't make a difference. Certain doors cannot be closed once they are open. No matter which way you run, there are some routes that lead to the same place. The boot prints are now more common. Always fresh, always observing, occasionally damp, occasionally dry. In my peripheral vision, the shadows get bolder, taking on shapes that aren't supposed to be there in 3 dimensions. My regular companion now smells of chemicals and copper. I discovered a storm-drained grate on my bathroom floor tonight that wasn't there the day before. The building manager shows me schematics that I can't focus on, but he claims it's always been there. I hear water trickling below, but it sounds like it's coming from a lot deeper than the apartment beneath mine should be. I am aware of their desires. The murmurs have grown louder and more persistent. To see what lies beneath that deserted corporate park, they want me to go back to those tunnels and follow the left path where the boot prints led. A part of me, which is getting bigger every day, longs to leave, to comprehend, to know whether this encroaching madness is genuine or whether reality has gone insane. I can now see the white vehicle parked outside my building. It has remained there for 3 days. Even with the engine off, it continues to rumble. I don't hear it. I feel it in my bones. There is no one in the driver's seat. Has never been full. Will never be full. However, there is something patient and timeless watching from within that darkness. I believe I'll use a shortcut once more tomorrow. Take another stroll around the deserted development. Down the left tunnel, follow the boot prints. See where they take you. I might discover my partner, or what's left of him there. Perhaps I will discover answers. Perhaps all I'll discover are more riddles, more tunnels, and more whispering, breathing shadows. Or perhaps I've already arrived. Perhaps I never went. Perhaps all of this is merely a dream that something is having while it sleeps in those caverns. And I will completely vanish when it awakens. Understanding is promised by the murmurs. Truth is promised by the shadows. The boot prints indicate a course to take. All I need to do is return. The second story. 2 weeks later, the hydraulic fluid is still stuck to my outfit. Washing won't get rid of it. The charred metal blended with that artificial sweetness. I convince myself that it's nothing more than the cloth retaining molecules. However, there are times when the smell gets stronger while I'm laying in bed late at night, and I hear that steady beeping again, precisely in sync with my heartbeat. When we received the call, I've been working there for 2 months. The steel mill on the north side, where industrial wastelands flow into the city. That night, my companion was an old-timer who had witnessed everything twice. When dispatch broke the news of an operator down at Bethlehem Steelworks, he hardly raised his head from his crossword puzzle. Like some old cathedral devoted to industry, the building towered above the night sky. Ghosts danced in the sodium lights as steam escaped from a dozen locations. The supervisor, a slender man with trembling hands, was waiting for us when we pulled up to Gate 3. The catastrophe occurred close to the blast furnaces in Section 7. A wall of heat struck us first, making it seem like drowning in reverse when we breathed. Then arrived the incessant clatter of machines, made human cognition seem insignificant and fleeting. About 30 feet up, the supervisor yelled something about a catwalk, but the industrial symphony drowned out anything he had to say. On the bottom level, we discovered the operator sprawled amid metal shavings that gleamed like shattered glass. Down there, the stench was overpowering. Yes, hydraulic fluid, but also something else. There was something natural and unnatural that made my stomach knot. The man's eyes rolled back, revealing too much white, although he was hardly conscious. There was blood, but not as much as you'd anticipate from a fall like that, and his hard hat was completely cracked. While I was stabilizing his neck, my partner began to check vital signs. The radio interference started at that point. First static, then voice bits that clip in and out. Something different, not dispatch. Numbers repeated in a hollow, processed, metallic voice. 17 locker 17. At 1700, the shift changes. I glanced at my partner, who seemed to be oblivious to it as he worked to start 4. Under the strong, industrial glare, the supervisor had retreated, his face going white. I looked him in the eye, and he turned and hurried to the stairs. The odd atmosphere pressed down on us as we carefully and meticulously maneuvered the operator onto the backboard. His hand seized my wrist with unexpected force as we raised him. Words formed on his lips that I couldn't hear over the equipment. I leaned in. As though he were speaking through water, the words were twisted and wet. I'm still working. Not able to go. I'm still working. It should have been a regular commute to the hospital, but that same mechanical voice kept cutting in and out of the radio. Locker 17. It is necessary to gather the contents. Unfinished shift. With his eyes focused on the road and his jaw tight, my boyfriend drove silently. He simply turned the radio off completely when I inquired if he heard the interference. The operator was sent directly to trauma at the emergency room. Even though we left after the mill's supervisor, who was already there, nevertheless beat us. He drew me away so my partner could finish the paperwork. He continued, "You need to get his things," and pressed a key into my hand. The metal remained heated. Locker 17. Corporate policy. Within 4 hours following the tragedy, all personal belongings were gathered. I wanted to say that Wyatt couldn't wait until dawn, but I was stopped by something in his gaze. Perhaps it was recognition or fear, like if he had seen this before. It felt like it took forever to travel back to the mill. I went by myself. I informed my partner that I had neglected to collect something from the scene. Without the emergency lights and the sense of urgency, the facility appeared different. Another night shift that grinds away at souls and steel. The changing room in the basement housed Locker 17. There was an almost intentional pattern to the flickering of the fluorescent lights. Unremarkable, the locker itself was dented and painted that industrial green that isn't found in nature. There were keys, a wallet, an unfinished lunch, and a pager that was still buzzing against the metal shelf. Alert after alert appeared on the screen. All of them were time-stamped from hours before to the event and our call. Catwalk 7. Inspection is necessary. Variance in pressure was found. An operator reaction is required. The messages continue to scroll. The same pattern keeps happening. The timestamp remained constant. 2017, 2017. I put the things in my pockets and started to walk away, but the lights went out entirely. The phantom beeping that had begun in my ears was matched by heavy, repetitive footfall on the floor above me in the darkness. Everything turned crimson as the emergency lighting came on, and I either saw him or believed that I did. There was a motionless person at the far end of the room. My coveralls are similar to the operator's, but in some way incorrect. Too tall. It pained to see joints bent at angles. I blinked and it vanished, but above me, the pacing footsteps persisted. Despite my lack of pride, I sprinted through the hallways and up the stairs, which all appeared the same in the emergency lighting. The footsteps came next, always above, always in time with that beeping sound that was coming from the walls, my mind, or both. Even though I was positive my partner had switched off the radio in the ambulance, it was still on when I returned. Clearer now, that metallic voice again. Change of shift rejected. Coverage is necessary. Went back to Station 17. Silently, I drove back to base. Presented the personal belongings to the supervisor, who was inexplicably still waiting. He accepted them silently. However, I saw him looking at the pager. He tightened his face at everything he read. It ought to have ended there. Another industrial mishap. One further reminder that people are as much a part of steel mills as iron ore is. But when I got home, the radio interference followed. I keep my scanner running out of habit, but it began to detect broadcasts that didn't match any known frequency. It's always the same metallic voice throughout 2017. It always led back to the mill, sometimes in the form of coordinates. Occasionally, it was the schedules for employees whose names I didn't know. It was just counting at times. 17, 17, 17. During my free time, I began to drive past the mill. Couldn't resist. I was drawn there by something, as if I had been marked in some way by the location, gravity, or magnetic. In the daylight, things appear to be normal. Trucks loading and unloading, workers arriving and departing. But I would see things at night. Figures who made incorrect movements on the catwalks. The light emanating from their safety gear was different from the sodium lighting. Supervisors would be seen marking time that had already passed, checking blank clipboards, and nodding at nothing. And there was always someone walking with the same pace on Catwalk 7, exactly where the operator had collapsed. The beep, 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 step, step, step. A week later, I returned to see how the operator was doing. There was no record of him at the hospital. Nothing. No therapy, no admission. I called the mill, and they informed me that there hadn't been an accident. There are no event reports or claims for injuries. I had talked to the supervisor. Nobody who fit that description was employed there. However, I had the key. You still have it. The key to Locker 17 seems like it was just taken out of someone's hand and is warm in my pocket. I occasionally awaken in the year 2017. That's right, that ear beeping noise. I have to check to see if I'm bleeding it because the hydraulic fluid scent is so strong. Last week, my partner resigned, simply handed in his badge and left without explaining why. But once at night, I caught a glimpse of him driving by the mill, like me, just sitting in his car and observing. As with everyone else who has taken that call, traversed those catwalks, and heard that metallic voice break through the static before. It's still done on the radio. Enough, but not every night. Enough to serve as a reminder that I still have some sort of connection to that location. Perhaps I never left at all. Perhaps none of us do. I occasionally consider using the key to return to Locker 17 and check what's there now. But I'm aware of what I'll discover. The same pager still vibrating with 2017 alerts, the same wallet, and the same keys. Because in situations like those, time doesn't function properly. Where metal and flesh mingle, where shifts never stop, and where the machines are powered by something other than steam and electricity. My voice, mechanical and processed, but unmistakably mine, was heard on the radio last night, reporting an accident at the mill, operator down on Catwalk 7, and asking for a fast response. I wasn't working. I was lying in bed at home, listening to myself complain about an accident that had either never happened, had happened, or kept happening. Trapped in an industrial cycle that never stops, much like the mills themselves. The odor is intensifying. The luscious, synthetic hydraulic fluid pouring into my pores. I'm unable to break the rhythm of the beeping, which is now persistent. Additionally, I occasionally perceive myself incorrectly when I glance in the mirror. Too tall, with joints bent at improper angles. Not wearing my own coveralls. Perched atop a catwalk that I have never scaled. I might be going crazy. Perhaps the long hours, the stress of the job, or the ongoing trauma exposure. Perhaps it's catching up at last. The logical side of my brain says that. The portion that continues to believe in linear time, cause and consequence, and the distinction between the actual and the imagined. The key in my pocket, however, is genuine. There's a real odor that won't go away. It's real enough that the voice on the radio keeps calling me back. I have another shift tonight. Now it's the 20th. The radio will crackle in 17 minutes. The call will be received. An operator near the blast furnaces in Section 7 of Bethlehem Steelworks. And since that's what I do, I'll answer. I've always done it. Well, I do all the time. The ambulance had already started up. I haven't started it yet, but I can hear it idling outside. Despite quitting last week, my partner is already in the passenger seat. I already have a mental map of the way to the mill. From the entrance to Catwalk 7, every turn, gate, and foot counts. Now, my uniform leaks hydraulic fluid, creating trails that vanish before they reach the ground. My pulse is in time with the beeping, or perhaps it has synchronized with my pulse. In any case, we are now in harmony. I'm a member of the same system as the mill. The interminable change that began prior to the accident and persists following it, folding in on itself akin to the pressing, shaping, and pressing of metal. 2016 at this time. A minute. My pocket is blazing with the key. It's locker 17. The supervisor, who never existed, is waiting with unfiled paperwork. 30 feet into superheated air, the operator, who is never admitted, continues to fall, always falling, onto a bed of metal shavings that glitter like broken glass, like stars, like the lights of a metropolis that grows on the bones of the men who feed it. 2017, the radio crackles. I respond. The third story. As if it were a cause for celebration, the listing read, recently remodeled basement apartment. My first caution should have been $400 below market rate. Desperation, however, has a method of causing you to ignore the obvious. In February, Milwaukee is not nice to jobless people. And you don't question why a great property remains unoccupied for 6 months when you're 3 months behind on everything. It was snowing when I moved in. As I dragged the boxes down the small outside stairs, they were getting wet. It was astonished how large the basement was. White paint was applied to exposed brick walls. The new laminate flooring made an excessive effort to mimic hardwood floors. The antiseptic showroom glow was put on everything by the track lighting. A solid oak record rack with brass corners was left in the corner by the previous occupant. I could either keep it or throw it away, the landlord stated. I held on to it. The first 3 nights were uneventful. Slowly, I unloaded, placed my desk against the wall that received the most light from the tiny windows near the ceiling, and organized my books on the built-in shelves. The space felt nearly comfortable during the day as sunlight streamed through the windows. The track lighting created shadows at night that weren't quite acting like they should. Where logic dictated they should be, they're non-existent in some instances and too long in others. The hallway light was on when I first woke up on the 4th night. I reminded myself that aged wiring was not unusual in and of itself. However, after adjusting my eyes, I noticed it standing next to the record, rack, motionless. Adrenaline rushed through my veins like icy water at first, thinking someone had broken in. But as I tried to concentrate and blinked, I saw that this wasn't quite a person. The figure was man-shaped, of average height, and was dressed in what might have been shadows or a suit. It was like gazing at someone through frosted glass, with a smooth, hazy surface where the face should have been. Not exactly featureless. No matter how long I stared, nothing became clear, even though there were impressions of features where the lips and eyes should be. The next thing I knew, the hallway light was out and morning light was pouring in through the windows, so I must have fallen back asleep. Obviously a dream. Tension from the relocation, strange environment. The mind is deceiving. Then I caught a whiff of the coffee. That specific burnt sugar note that my grandmother's percolator used to produce was rich dark roast. It drew me out of bed because it smelled so good. In my kitchen, I discovered a full pot that was still warm with condensation dripping on the glass. I lived by myself. No coffee had been made by me. Coffee grinds weren't even mine yet. I had on my list of things to buy on my afternoon supermarket run. I tried to make sense of it as I watched the dark liquid swirl away after I poured it down the sink. Perhaps I had done it while I was asleep. However, I wasn't the first person to sleepwalk. Years have passed. Muscle memory from my last place, perhaps. Perhaps. That night, while I was bringing out the trash, the upstairs renter caught me on the stairs. He was slender, most likely in his mid-40s, and exuded a tense energy that left you exhausted just by seeing him. His gaze continued to flit down toward my door, past me. "Have you settled in?" he inquired. "All right." "Yes," I replied. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" he inquired. I hesitated, and that was sufficient. His shoulders drooped in apparent relief. Then, speaking in that quick hush tone individuals adopt when they're worried about being overheard or not believed, he informed me about his experiences. The fuzzy face and the vaguely resolved features were the same as those he had seen in my image. But at his apartment, it showed up in the kitchen, putting its non-face against the microwave's glass door and carefully tilting its head back and forth, as if it were attempting to see through the distortion to what was underneath or to see its own reflection. I've also seen that since that talk, every time I use the microwave, a perfect circle of condensation the size of a face forms on the door from the inside. Even when I'm only warming up coffee, it occurs. Nothing that ought to generate so much steam. Slowly, beginning at the outside and moving inward, the fog forms. I swear I can see the shape of features attempting to push through in the few seconds before it fully emerges. I began journaling, recording everything that happened. Every third or fourth night, the figure next to the record rack would show up in the same location and remain motionless. There were 2 more coffee incidents. I have never purchased the same brand. The percolator tastes of the same granny. I once discovered a cup that had previously been poured and was still boiling on my kitchen counter. The history of the structure revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Converted to apartments in the 1970s, the building dates back to 1924. No catastrophic histories, no recorded fatalities. Just last year, the basement was transformed into an apartment after serving as a storage space and a laundry room. It had been a major makeover. Knew every detail, including the studs. However, there was a measuring error. While I was setting up the furnishings, I became aware of it. There should have been less space in the basement. There should have been an additional 100 square feet someplace, based on the foundation that could be seen from the outside. When he asked me up for beer, I measured compulsively and compared it to the floor layout of the residence upstairs. Even with the thicker walls in the basement, his flat was unquestionably bigger than mine. Eventually, I located it. A portion of the wall behind the water heater had a distinct knocking sound. Empty. However, there was only smooth drywall painted the same white as everything else. No door or seam. When I contacted, the landlord denied ignorance. Previous quirk of architecture, he said. They were everywhere in old structures. The presence became more assertive. It would have moved by the time I woke up. I alternate between the foot of my bed and the kitchen doorway. That same hazy look all the time, as if someone had erased reality itself. While I was watching, it never moved or made noise, yet there was growing evidence of its activity. Books, shelves spine, and all my vinyl recordings, dishes rearranged in the cabinets. I turned to the wall and began gathering them to fill that empty rack. 3 weeks after our initial talk, the renter upstairs stopped me once more. He appeared haggard. Under his eyes are dark circles that resemble bruises. He claimed that the identical hazy circles had been left by the object pressing against his bathroom mirror. Worse, he had begun to get glimpses of it during the day. Swift motions on mirrored surfaces, a blur slipping by windows, a figure on his TV's blank screen. The same thing had been happening to me, but I hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. All surfaces that reflected had come under suspicion. I had taken down my bathroom mirror. When not in use, I angled my computer monitor toward the wall and even covered the black screen of my phone with tape. However, it was ineffective. The presence spread to other surfaces. The window at night, the oven's glass door, and even my coffee's surface when the light strikes it perfectly. The coffee kept coming in, a cup at times, a full pot at others. Always that same unique flavor that transported me back to my grandmother's kitchen when I was safe and 8 years old. I took a sip. That seems familiar to me. But after the 5th, 6th, and 10th times, it seemed riskier to say no, as if turning down a gift from something that had taken a lot of work to understand. What you like? Sleep started to elude me. Not exactly out of terror. The presence had never been explicitly menacing, but rather the result of a persistent sense of being watched, a sort of hyper-awakeness. I would lie in bed and follow its motions by observing the minute variations in air pressure and the way the shadows changed without any changes in the light source. Occasionally, I would sense a little depression in the mattress, as though someone had taken a seat on the bed's edge. But as I turned to look, all I saw was that recognizable blur standing with its face turned to the wall in the corner. I began to locate my handwriting and notes, but nothing I could recall writing. Initially remembered basic information. Examine the record rack. The coffee is cooling down. Examine yourself in the mirror. Then more urgent, longer texts. It desires attention. The glass is becoming thinner. Quit avoiding your own face. The renter upstairs left without warning. No farewell, just gone for a day. His apartment went up for rent right away. I also considered leaving, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was the low rent. Perhaps it was obstinacy. Perhaps it was the increasing confidence that this whatever it was not limited to the apartment. I had it in me. Either I was in it or now. The lines had become blurry. My perception of my own face has changed. I notice flashes of my reflection that don't quite fit my expectations in the few seconds before the microwave door fogs, before I can turn away. Features seemed a little strange, as if my face had been drawn from memory and the proportions were incorrect. Over time, the haze next to the record rack has become more familiar rather than sharper. The features that were suggested are starting to solidify into something that is nearly identifiable. I made a decision last night. Rather than running away when the presence materialized, I moved in its direction, stood squarely in front of it, and got close enough to smell the coffee scent that clung to it like cologne. The hazy face leaned in my direction, and I saw it clearly for the first time. What they were attempting to become, not the qualities per se. It was my face, or attempting to be like something that had been observing me through microwave doors, cloudy mirrors, and frosted glass, trying to figure out how eyes, noses, and mouths were arranged, and trying to understand what it meant to have a face at all. I stumbled backward as the physical intensity of the recognition struck me. I now know why there was empty space behind the walls and why the specifications were incorrect. It's not that the place is too small. It's folded in on itself like paper twice. The thinnest membrane of reality separates two spaces that have the same location. I'm not by myself here either. I wasn't. I've even begun brewing coffee for it. Every morning, I leave one cup by the record rack and take another for myself. The cup can occasionally empty while I'm not looking. I occasionally discover it later in odd locations. Once neatly balanced on the edge of the bathroom sink I've been avoiding, now behind the books inside the microwave. The fog has also changed on the glass surfaces. It is beginning to expose rather than to obscure. The features get clearer every time the microwave door fogs. No longer my features, or not only mine, something in between, a hybrid of what I am and what it aspires to be. Somewhere in that hazy area between obscurity and identification is where we're meeting. I no longer maintain a journal. Documenting something that is documenting itself is pointless. Coffee rings, hazy glasses, repositioned objects, and the gradual blurring of the lines between observer and observed are all examples of how it is writing its own story. There is no longer a presence beside the record rack. Together, we stand there. Or maybe we're the same thing, standing there, trying to recall which side of the glass we began on while staring at our reflection in the window. The new renter upstairs has begun to inquire. When she's not in the restroom, she talks about the way her mirrors fog, the unusual noises coming from below, and the scent of coffee at strange hours. It's an old building, I tell her. These things happen, I tell her. As she nervously looks toward my door, I can see that she is wearing the same expression that the last tenant had, and that I must have had as well. Those initial weeks. She asked me directly yesterday if I had seen anything out of the ordinary. Like before, I paused, but this time I found myself saying no rather than confirming her anxieties. Nothing out of the ordinary. It seemed natural and effortless, as if someone else were speaking through me. Or perhaps I was the one. And the once distinct object had grown so entwined that its denials had become part of me. I'm not sure when my fear subsided. Perhaps it happened gradually, as in the subtle focusing of those hazy details. Perhaps the realization that the monster beneath your bed is actually the shadow of your own dangling foot was abrupt. Or perhaps terror simply changed into something else. Acceptance, acknowledgement, and a sort of dreadful closeness with something that has been observing you from the opposite side of every reflection and knows you better than you do. This morning, the coffee pot is full once more. I pour 2 mugs and proceed to the record rack, where my reflection is waiting for me through the window in the morning light. Together, we sip coffee that tastes like my grandmother's cooking, like safety that never truly existed, and like memory. Our face is finally focusing in the glass. The 4th story. When I located the station, the Texas sun had been dead for 3 hours. It was merely a concrete box squatting next to Highway 90, like something the desert had coughed up and forgotten, with no signs to indicate its existence. Everything was painted a sickly yellow paler, and my skin turned the color of old newspapers as the fluorescent lights inside flickered with that certain frequency that makes your teeth hurt. My throat felt like it had been gargling sand. I had been driving for 6 hours straight, and my water bottle had been empty since Sanderson. When I pushed inside, the bell above the door began to chime, but continued to do so. There was a constant mechanical tremor, as though the clapper had become caught in the middle of its swing, instead of the joyous ding-ding of arrival. As I was waiting for someone to come behind the counter, the sound pierced my skull. With the bills spread out like playing cards, the register remained open. The liquid in a coffee pot, which had likely been cooking there since the morning or possibly longer, was thick and black like motor oil as it gurgled on a hot plate. The ringing ceased, with my boots resonating against what may have once been white linoleum that had become yellow like teeth. I made my way to the coolers at the rear. I could see condensation pouring in almost intentional rivulets through the glass doors of the refrigerator, which hummed with mechanical strain, as if someone were creating patterns from within. Even though the air coming from the vents was frigid, the water bottles felt warm to the touch. In any case, I grabbed two. That's when he came in. This time, the door did not ring. I only saw him in the corner of my eye. He wasn't looking at the energy drinks, but he could see a figure in a worn denim jacket approaching them. I could see his gaze following my hand as I reached for a third bottle in the curved reflection of the glass door. His reflection moved with me when I moved to the left, keeping the ideal angle so he could observe without appearing to observe. I walked over to the counter. His footfall were weirdly out of time with his movements as he slipped behind me, always keeping 2 aisles between us. When he stood motionless, I could hear him walking. When he moved, there was silence. The primordial awareness that comes from millions of years of being prey pricked my neck. The register was still accessible. The counter is still empty. I made my way to the door after leaving a 20 next to the coffee pot. He trailed behind. The parking area outside seemed smaller than it had been when I first came, as though the desert had gotten closer while I was inside. Under a street light that had never been on before, my automobile sat by itself. The light bulb is now emitting the same awful yellow fluorescence as the store. It was perfectly surrounded by moths, and their shadows made almost letter-like designs on my windshield. I opened the door. Too many times the click echoed. Initially only outlines, two forms emerged from behind the ice maker, but moving into the light, they gained substance. Their feet made noises that didn't correspond with their steps, and they walked with the same unsynchronized gait as the man inside. One was dressed in what appeared to be a dust-colored postal outfit. The garments on the other one seemed to move and blur when I tried to focus on them, and there were no distinguishing features at all. The man from inside was already coming when my hand touched the door handle. It seemed like someone had drawn that practice smile with a ruler across his face. He cast shadows in the wrong way with his teeth because they caught the light incorrectly. If I had changed, he inquired. The words sounded rather normal, but there was a faint echo created by a second voice speaking slightly out of time beneath them. Shaking my head, I climbed into the car and slammed the door so forcefully that the glass rattled. A blue vehicle appeared in the rearview mirror. It appeared out of nowhere, as though it had always been there and I had only just noticed it. The inside was perfectly illuminated by a dashboard glow that pulsed like a heartbeat, although there were no headlights. The silhouette of the driver didn't shift, didn't move, and didn't appear to breathe. I floored it after turning the key. Black and rubber splattered on the concrete as the tires screeched against the asphalt. The three figures stood motionless in the mirror, observing. The sedan took a while to follow. It waited until I was nearly at the highway before sliding along like something on rails and moving forward silently. My hands finally stopped shaking enough to see the speedometer after 20 meters. The sedan kept a perfect distance behind me, always 3 car widths back, even at 95 and up. Regardless of my speed, its shadow landed on the road incorrectly, reaching forward rather than backward and extending fingers of darkness toward my bumper. I noticed the receipt at that point. The wind crushed it flat as it fluttered across the windshield wiper, but it managed to stay in place. The printing was crisp and modern, but the paper appeared old, yellowed like the linoleum in the store. Even though I had never given it, my name was at the top. The timestamp displayed a list of the things I hadn't bought, down to the second of my arrival. You mean 3 bottles of water? 1 local road map. No maps have been shown to me. Just 1 reservation. What? 1 trip back. In spite of the breeze, the bottom was predetermined in crimson ink that appeared wet. Go back. With shaky hands, I grabbed the receipt as I pulled over at the next exit. The paper had a skin-like texture and felt unnaturally thick and slightly heated. The blue automobile was gone, but I could sense it lingering in the gap between the blind spots on the mirror behind me. When I looked at the receipts directly, the details changed. Similar to flies dispersing from light, words rearranged themselves. The timestamp now displayed the date for tomorrow, then dates that hadn't yet occurred the next week. Years would pass before it happened. The address of a store changed every time I blinked. Route 90, Route 285, and Route 54. I had never heard of these roads that may not be there. As I drove through the night, I only pulled over for gas at stations manned by actual people. People who looked at me, counted change, and whose footsteps matched mine. But I would discover something at every stop. The same message appeared on a napkin shoved in my gas cap, a leaflet stuck in my door handle, and a business card hidden beneath my wiper. Go back. In an attempt to get rid of something that wasn't following me in any way I could comprehend, I traveled 400 miles by morning, zigzagging throughout West Texas in illogical patterns. The dust on my hood, the moisture on my windows, and the arrangement of dead insects on my grill all had fresh messages that the morning sun unveiled. Return, return, return. Desperate for normalcy, for witnesses, for the everyday turmoil of human contact, I paused at a Fort Stockton cafe. As sickly yellow as those fluorescent lights, the waitress's coffee heated. Talking at frequencies that made my teeth hurt, the other customers moved in time with a well-known, unsynchronized gait. Everything on the menu was water when I glanced at it. Water bottles, warm water, water that had a memory of being something other. The weight of the receipt in my pocket had increased. I sensed it drawing back toward the west, toward the unmarked stations squatting in the desert but not down. Like a rubber band stretched past its breaking point, the tug got stronger the farther I put between us. It's been 3 days, or perhaps 3 hours, since I started driving. Since the station, time stutters forward and backward like a broken film reel. When I look at the rear view, I see the blue car and windows, puddles, mirrors that shouldn't be there, and my own image. I occasionally see myself glancing back at myself with that cultivated smile. I drove it. The receipt has evolved into multiple receipts. They proliferate between the pages of my owner's manual, in my glove box, and in my pockets. Each one depicts distinct objects, times, and variations of events that have previously occurred or have not yet occurred. One displays 1987 as the purchase date, another 2047. They all come to the same conclusion. Go back. At that station, I am aware of what awaits. Not demise. It will be too easy, too definitive. Something different. An unfinished transaction that was initiated. Before I was born, a reservation was made in my name. A voyage back to a place that lives between the highway lines, between the ringing of bells and their echo. Once more, perhaps for the first time, the sun sets. Every road returns to that concrete box, even though the desert extends in all directions. That coffee on its hot dish, blazing forever, that yellow brightness. Now the steering wheel rotates on its own. Gentle corrections in a language older than words that seem like invitations, suggestions, or orders. Either I'm driving it, it's driving me, or the blue sedan is no longer there in the mirror. With every mile that goes by, every repeated receipt, every return to the starting point that hasn't yet occurred but has already occurred, the difference becomes less significant. On the horizon, just where it has always been and where it was before absent, the station emerges. My teeth are better at deciphering Morse code than my brain, as the lights flicker in that familiar regularity, writing out messages. In the void between sound and silence. The bell has been ringing and will continue to do so indefinitely. Watched by reflections that move when their owners are motionless, I either pull into the parking lot, or I never left, or I continue to select water from coolers that hum with mechanical agony. I'm holding a receipt that reads returned. Returning is what the one in my pocket says. Return is written in the one that hasn't been written yet. Now I get it. Water, change, or anything else that could be purchased or sold was never the subject of the transaction. It has to do with the actual return. The trip back to a location that is exclusive to the returnees. A loop that never closes to close. A receipt for an unfulfilled transaction that was finished before the deadline to proceed. Either I open the door or it opens. Or perhaps it's been open the entire time, just waiting for me to enter and discover that I'm already inside. In a stop that sits between the highway and the desert, selecting water from coolers that recall being something else. Between departing and returning, between the reflected and the real. The bell rings, pauses, and then rings again. Tires scream across asphalt as I drive off. My boots reverberate against the yellowed linoleum as I enter. A 20 that has been there since before the coffee started to burn is being left behind by me as I stand at the counter. My windshield flutters with the receipt. Written and unwritten, new and old. Saying what has always been said and always will be stated. Go back. The fifth story. The Chicago Blue Line station's fluorescent lights flickered in a certain pattern that makes you wonder if it's degradation or deliberate. 3:17 a.m. The station was deserted save for myself and the far off the sound of a train or the city's circulation system digesting another night could have been heard. Once more, I stayed late at work troubleshooting code that appeared to reinvent itself whenever I turned my head. The particular tiredness that results from staring at computers in dimly lit spaces hurt my eyes. In the train window, I saw a reflection that reminded me of someone I had forgotten. They proceeded to division. All three of them were dressed in the polyester scarves that soccer supporters wrap around their bodies like protective gear. First came the odor. Something sharper, like copper coins and vinegar, combined with stale beer. They produced their own rhythm that hurt my inner ear as they swayed both in and out of the train's motion. I hadn't even looked up from my phone, let alone spoken. However, one of they began chatting in an exaggerated accent, the tall one with the face that appeared to change characteristics when I wasn't looking at it. The way I still pronounced some consonants when I was fatigued, the Portuguese inflection I had worked years taming, my accent. I kept my eyes down, counting stops, and when the train lurched and the lights went out for exactly 2 seconds, the men were closer. Not dramatically closer, but close enough that I knew they'd moved without seeing it happen. "Please to be excusing," he said to his friends, and they burst out laughing like breaking glass, played backward. The problem was I recognized the phrase. It was exactly what I'd said to a barista that morning, fumbling with my card at the register, word for word, inflection for inflection. Grand Station, 2 stops left. I stood, moving toward the door, and they stood, maintaining that careful distance that could be coincidence or threat. The tall one was speaking again, but this time it wasn't mimicry, but prediction. He was saying the exact thoughts running through my head, voiced in my accent, a half second before I thought them. The middle one, whose face I couldn't quite hold in memory, even while looking at it, began humming. It was a song my grandmother used to sing while cooking. I hadn't heard it in 15 years. The station's architecture felt wrong. Too many corners, passages that shouldn't exist according to the map I'd memorized over 5 years of commuting commutes. I headed for what should have been the exit, but the corridor stretched longer than physics should allow. I jumped off at State Lake instead. Don't look back. Just need to get home. The platform was empty except for a janitor pushing a mop bucket that left no trail of water. The 3 men followed, their laughter now a physical presence that pressed against my eardrums like depth pressure. My phone vibrated, and the screen displayed an incoming call from my own number timestamped 2 minutes ago. Not 2 minutes from now, but 2 minutes ago, and I didn't answer. It seemed as though there were 6 of them now, or 9, or I had turned into a service alley between buildings. The kind of shortcut you're not supposed to know about, but every late-night commuter does. The sound of my footsteps came back incorrectly, not quite an echo, more like someone else walking in shoes exactly like mine, matching my gait, but offset by half a beat. The alley should have opened on a Franklin, but instead it continued, the walls breathing slightly in my peripheral vision. In an instant, the voicemail notification appeared. The laughter had ceased, but the silence was thick and expectant, like the pause before thunder. I could feel them behind me, not following, but already there, waiting in the pauses between seconds. On my right, a building with a lit lobby appeared. It was one of those places with 24-hour doormen that promise security in exchange for half your salary and rent. I rapped on the glass, probably looking exactly like what I was, a man in panic being chased by something he couldn't fully explain. No doorman. The lobby was lit, but emptied. Then I heard my name, not yelled or muttered, but just stated matter of fact in my own voice, not from behind me, but from where I was standing, as if I'd said it myself without moving my mouth. The voice had the exact rasp I get when I've been talking too much, with a slight whistle on the S sound from when I broke my front tooth in college. My phone buzzed again, a text, this time from my number. "Stop running from yourself." The doorman came in so abruptly that I nearly screamed. He was staring at me through the glass with the expression of someone who had been watching the entire time, and his face was familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. I pushed inside, and the warmth hit me like a physical wall, but it was wrong warm, the kind that comes from too many bodies in too small a space. He moved deliberately slowly, each motion seeming to require tremendous effort, as if he were pushing through thick liquid. The lock clicked 7 times. Buildings like this had one lock, maybe 2. 7 clicks, each deeper than the last, like tumblers falling in a mechanism much larger than a door. The lobby was still empty, and the laughter began again behind me. The men hadn't followed me in. They were already here, had always been here, and were waiting in the empty spaces between the furniture. The doorman was gone, or perhaps he had never been there. The desk where he should have been sitting was covered in dust that appeared to have accumulated for years, save for 3 handprints, new ones made by too many fingers. And I ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, my footsteps echoing incorrectly once more. The hallway on the 4th floor stretched in both directions, lined with doors that all looked the same except for the numbers, which weren't in any order that made sense. For B, 9X2, Thursday, Mom's room, the one you don't open. My apartment should have been on the 7th floor of a different building 8 blocks away, but my key was already in my hand, and it fit perfectly into the lock of door 4B. The metal was warm, almost feverish, and inside was my apartment. Exactly my apartment down to the coffee mug. The phone rang, and I recognized the number on the caller ID. My childhood home, which had been demolished to make way for a parking structure in 2015. I answered. The voice on the other end was my grandmother's, left on the counter that morning, still half full and growing a skin of milk, but the windows showed the wrong view. Not the city, but the inside of another apartment where someone who looked like me, but wasn't quite, was staring back through their window at me. "However," she replied, "you're home late," using my current tone and tired rasp. "The others are already here," she said. I hadn't in the living room. I hung up, and the laughter continued. The bathroom mirror showed my reflection, but he was already brushing his teeth, getting ready for bed. He looked well rested, like he'd been home for hours. He smiled at me with too many teeth, all mine. I heard not 3 voices, but dozens, all mine from different ages. That was me laughing at cartoons when I was 5 years old. Teenage me's nervous laugh before a first date. The bitter laugh from after the divorce. Backing into the kitchen, I heard the refrigerator humming in unison with itself. 3 distinct notes that shouldn't have come from a single appliance, and saw that every shelf was stocked with identical takeout containers from the restaurant I had ordered from tonight, all of which had receipts dated tomorrow. The front door opened, and I entered the room looking just as worn out as I felt, carrying my laptop bag and wearing my jacket. That didn't acknowledge me, just walked by and fell asleep on the couch. A second door opened, one that hadn't been in the wall before, and another me came in, this time wearing gym clothes I'd thrown away years ago. They kept coming, ignoring each other, and going about their daily lives as if they were alone. The apartment was filled with slightly different versions of me. One had my face, but moved with someone else's mannerisms. Another had perfect features, but my exact method of cracking my knuckles when I was anxious, and so on, until the space could no longer accommodate them all. Eventually, though, it expanded inward like ant drawing. My phone buzzed, and I heard a message from myself. Check your voicemail. You're listening to this and wondering if you're having a breakdown. You're not. You're having a breakthrough. The barriers were thinner tonight. The alcohol helped even though you didn't drink. Their laughter was the key. Even though they weren't real, you're home now, even though you never left. Stop trying to understand which one you are. Start accepting that you're all of them. That was my voice, those speaking words I was thinking at the time, as if my thoughts were being broadcast from the past. The building was breathing now, really breathing, and I could hear its heartbeat in the walls. Or maybe it was my heartbeat, or maybe there was no difference anymore. The lobby was now filled with doormen, all of them with that almost familiar face, all of them watching me with the patience of people who knew how this ended. The front door was open, the street beyond looked like Chicago, but felt like nowhere, and the skyline was familiar. Everyone turned to look at me, and they all smiled with recognition that felt like drowning. My phone rang again, and the caller ID simply said, I stepped outside, and the 3 soccer fans were still laughing, but now I could see their faces clearly, and they were all mine, me at different ages, different weights, and different stages of exhaustion. They waved, a coordinated gesture that I felt my own arm wanting to complete. We've been waiting for you to catch up. I said, welcome home. And even though I wasn't speaking, I could feel my mouth moving in response. The city surrounding me was crowded with my footsteps, past and future, all walking in different directions, all leading to the same place. Every reflection in every window was me, but not like twins in a photograph where you can't tell which is which because they're both neither and both. I'm still walking, or perhaps I'm already at home, or perhaps I never left the train, and the fluorescent lights are still flickering in that rhythm that makes you wonder if it's intentional or decay. The laughter goes on everywhere, and it sounds exactly like me when I realize a joke I should have understood years ago when I realize I'm the punchline, and it sounds exactly like story 6. My speedometer read 65, then 70, then 75, and the sedan matched every adjustment, keeping that suffocating distance as if we were bound by an invisible tether. I had been driving through rural Idaho for 3 hours when the black sedan appeared. In that time, the road behind me was empty, and then those twin lights filled my mirror, so close I couldn't see the grille and could only see the harsh glare that turned my car's interior into a stark theater of shadows. They weren't just following me, they were breathing down my neck like something alive and hungry. I could taste copper in my mouth, that metallic tang of fear that comes when your body knows something your mind hasn't yet come to terms with. The road ahead curved through potato fields and abandoned farmhouses, their broken windows catching my headlights like dead eyes opening and closing. The roundabout looked like a promise of escape, with its 3 exits radiating into different directions of darkness. I passed through here years ago, remembering it as an ordinary traffic circle where farm roads intersected, but tonight it seemed to pulse with possibility. I entered without signaling, tires humming against the worn asphalt, and the sedan followed. On the second rotation, I saw the headlights behind me sweep like a predator testing its prey. Suddenly, as if someone had thrown a switch, the lights behind me died. I could still feel the weight of that presence and hear the faint growl of an engine that wasn't mine. The hair on my forearm remained rigid under my jacket. On the third rotation, I strained to see in the mirror and saw nothing but the red glow of my own tail lights painting the empty road. The sedan had disappeared. Not turned off, not pulled away, but just stopped driving. Exist in the space it had occupied seconds before. I took the gravel exit, my hands shaking against the steering wheel, my knuckles white as bone. A quarter of a mile down, the cattle pen appeared in my headlights, its rusted wire and weathered posts familiar from a dozen drives through this area. The cattle guard rattled beneath my tires as I pulled alongside the fence, that hollow metallic sound that always reminded me of xylophones made from pipes. I needed to stop, breathe, and persuade myself that there was a logical explanation for what had just happened. The engine ticked as it cooled, and there was silence against the windows, that total lack of sound that only exists in places where humanity has barely made a dent. I hadn't touched the dial, and the radio had been off since I'd started driving, preferring the silence to help me think through the meeting I'd attended in Boise. But now it breathed that electronic rhythm into the car's interior, and the green display showed no station, no frequency, just dashes where numbers should be. There were no insects, no wind, and no distant traffic, just the weight of nothingness pressing against my eardrums until they ached. It wasn't music or voices, but rather a rhythmic static that pulsed like someone tapping on a microphone. I reached for the power button. The tapping grew louder, almost desperate, like someone desperate to communicate. My finger lingered over the button, but I didn't press it. Something in that rhythm felt significant, like a warning or a plea, or perhaps both. I caught a glimpse of movement as the fence post began to vibrate, not all at once, but in a slow, methodical, and deliberate manner, beginning at the far end near the road and moving toward me like a set of wooden wire dominoes. Each post hummed for a second before passing the vibration to the next, the wire between them singing a low metallic note that made my teeth hurt. The vibration reached the post closest to my car and stopped. The wire still hummed, but it was softer now, as if it was waiting. The radio addict changed, became almost questioning. Thump, thump, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for something I couldn't name. Light exploded in the distance. The roundabout I'd left behind, maybe half a mile back down the road, suddenly blazed with illumination. Every street light, lights I hadn't even noticed in my panic, flared to life simultaneously, creating a perfect circle of brightness into the sedan was there, circling the roundabout in an endless loop, and even from this distance I could see it clearly in that unnatural brightness, with the black paint gleaming, moving at a constant speed, never changing, never stopping, and the driver's door hanging open, swinging slightly with each rotation, revealing an empty seat, no hands on the wheel, no shadow of a person inside. It looked wrong, staged, like someone had dropped a spotlight on a single point of interest in an otherwise empty theater. My body knew that something fundamental had changed, that the rules I'd lived by for 37 years no longer applied. The air in the car felt thicker, harder to breathe, like the atmospheric pressure had changed. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, not by eyes, but by something that didn't need eyes to see. The lights were on timer. The car was on some sort of autopilot, maybe a Tesla, though it hadn't looked modern enough for that technology. Thump, 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 and I found myself answering aloud, my voice cracking in the silence, asking what it wanted, telling it I didn't understand, pleading for it to make sense. The fence post started vibrating again, but backwards this time, from where I was standing toward the road, as if they were pointing the way back. I started the engine, and the radio instantly went silent, cutting off mid-thump. The fence ceased, but the roundabout blazed with light, and the sedan drove on its never-ending circle, its doors swinging mechanically. When I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, one of those fluorescent oases that promised normalcy in human contact, all of my instincts told me to floor it, to put as much distance between myself and whatever was happening in that circle of light as possible. 5 miles down the road, the attendant, a young man who couldn't have been older than 20, looked up from his phone when I entered, and I must have looked bad because his expression changed from boredom to concern. He told me I was white as a sheet, and I nearly laughed when he asked if I needed to call someone. I bought a coffee I didn't want and sat in my car under the harsh lights of the station canopy, watching the road I'd come from. Part of me expected to see those headlights appear, expected the sedan to pull in beside me. Duckers still open, still empty, but nothing came. After an hour, I drove on, took the long way home, and avoided that stretch of road entirely. Who would I call? The police? Tell them what exactly? That a car had followed me and then vanished? That fence post had vibrated? That an empty vehicle was driving itself in circles? The satellite image showed the circle clearly, with 3 exits exactly as I remembered, but in the middle of the roundabout, where there should have been grass or decorative landscaping, there was something else. The image was too pixelated to make out clearly, but it looked like marks in the earth, patterns that seemed deliberate, almost like tracks worn by something circling endlessly. 3 days later, I looked up the location on Google Maps to make sure the roundabout existed and that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Beginning at the outer edge and spiraling inward to a dark area in the precise center, the marks created a flawless spiral. The picture has a date stamp from 2 years prior, though I had to drive through the region once more for work the next week. I promised myself that I would follow the same path and demonstrate to myself that it had been fatigue, stress, or some other type of breakdown. However, my hand unconsciously led me off course when I got to the turnoff, adding 40 minutes to my travel time. Since then, I've passed that turnoff 6 times without ever taking it. When I can't sleep in the middle of the night, I sometimes imagine the sedan still circling with the door open, waiting for whatever was supposed to get in or whatever had gotten out. I imagine those fence posts indicating the return path by vibrating. The radio's rhythmic, persistent static comes to mind, as if it were attempting to convey a vital message that I was too human to comprehend. A coworker suggested using that path as a shortcut last month. Trying to appear informal, I asked him whether he had seen anything out of the ordinary about the roundabout. He gave me an odd look and claimed that the road was a straight line between 2 farms rather than a roundabout. Was correct when he insisted on showing me on the GPS on his phone. No 3 exits, no circle, just unbroken tarmac. But what I observed is known to me. I understand how I felt. I occasionally question whether I'm still in that roundabout when I'm driving alone at night, and a car emerges in my rearview mirror, following too closely. If the exit I took only led farther around the circle, if I never truly left. Lately, the fence posts outside my house have begun to hum. Only once in a while, for a brief moment, and always at night. They seem to be sending a message down the line because of the rhythm's familiarity, sequentiality, and purpose. When it occurs, I no longer gaze out the window. I'm terrified of what I could see in the distance, terrified of lights showing up where none should, fearful of identifying a black automobile with its door ajar, circling indefinitely, perhaps anticipating my return or someone or something claiming it. Since that night, my car's radio hasn't functioned properly. It always turns on to the same rhythmic pattern, to static and at random. Like a question I can't answer or a heartbeat that isn't mine. Thump, thump, thump. It's like an invitation that I'm afraid to accept, but equally afraid to turn down, since I'm discovering that some circles aren't intended to be broken. Once you see a pattern, it becomes a part of you. Additionally, certain routes never truly let you go, even if they are erased from memory and maps. They simply wait for you to finish the rotation you initiated patiently and eternally. The 7th story. The first thing that struck me was the smell of diesel, which was thick and unpleasant, like something that had been decaying in metal for decades. Our rental SUV was parked at the entrance to the remnants of Copper Creek. When the silver ran out in the 1890s, this Colorado mining town vanished. Although none of us mentioned the strange warmth that seemed to emanate from the deserted buildings up ahead, my 3 geological survey team members stood next to me, their breaths audible in the thin mountain air. I had recommended this diversion. I still feel the guilt of that choice like shattered glass in my stomach. The town spread out in front of us in different states of ruin. Wooden buildings that are bucking the passage of time. More than a century of high-altitude sunlight faded their boards gray. Dark, vacant windows gazed back at us, aside from a sporadic flash of light that gave the impression that something had just shifted out of the glass. The smell of diesel wasn't the only thing carried by the wind. It was not the only item beneath it. Chemical and sweet, like rotting fruit combined with antifreeze. My coworker gestured toward the former business store. Surprisingly intact was its facade. I saw it at that moment. The outfit in orange. It swayed in a wind I couldn't control as it dangled at ground level between 2 fallen buildings to sense. The fabric had a fresh appearance. In the afternoon sun, industrial orange was so glaring that it was painful to look at. My skin crawled, though, because of the way it moved, as though someone were crawling inside it and pushing forward on their belly. The material twisted and twisted. Despite this, the outfit never really moved. Squinting to make sense of what I was seeing, I took a step forward, with the arms stretching and retracting in a terrible beat that made me think of a bug attempting to escape its chrysalis. The jumpsuit resumed its hideous pantomime, with the chest area pushing out and then collapsing. When my coworker touched my shoulder, I realized I had been unintentionally approaching it. We went out. No,